mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the February webinar. My name is Mike Kramer, and I'm presenting today's webinar on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. I am the calibration program manager there. Today, as you can see, we're going to be reviewing Section 7.8 of the 2017 standards, which is the section on reporting the results. This webinar will be available in its entirety at the conclusion of this broadcast. This is being recorded. If you go to the PJLAlabs.com, which is our website, you can follow that link to recorded webinars. You can get this recording. Perhaps a colleague may have not been able to attend the live version. And what's also great is you can go back and select from various past webinars that we've done. Also, there's no need. We used to get a lot of requests just for the individual slides. They are just the individual slides by themselves are now available. You can capture them by going to the PJLA website there. On your screen, you should have a box where you can ask questions. Please keep any questions today in regards to the topic. At the conclusion of the webinar, I will go back and see what types of questions we have and review them and answer them to the best of my ability. This webinar is set for 1 hour, should not go any longer than an hour. I don't anticipate that. So Section 7.8, reporting the results. So if you think about this, I like to think about this as the final product that the laboratories are producing. It used to be in 2005, 510, Section 510, which was the very last section of the standard. I sort of felt that was appropriate because prior to those sections, we're looking at things that if you're doing an audit 217025, you're looking at everything that can impact the result. You're going to be reviewing requirements on personnel, assuring that appropriate procedures are used, the facilities are appropriate, any needed traceability is in place, proper equipment. You have a handling process. You've been through the approved vendors, qualifying those critical vendors. So I like to think of this section, which is now 7.8, reporting the result, as the final product that the laboratories are outputting. All those other elements have combined, and we're putting out the very reliable test or calibration or sampling reports. So reporting the result. So whenever a test or calibration report, if it utilizes the accrediting body symbol, or if it references laboratory accreditation to the standard 17025, they would be considered accredited reports, and they were intended to come under the realm of the laboratory's accreditation. Also, any applicable policies and procedures that your accreditation body may have in place, such as the utilization of the symbol for PJLA. That's PJLA SOP 3. So again, any reference, any use of the logo on a test or calibration report is an indication that that report is intended to come under your organization's scope of your accreditation. So this section, excuse me, 7.8, is divided, broken down into different elements that I have projected here on the screen. These include elements that are specific to testing, calibration, and now also sampling that is going to be used for further testing or calibration. So there we have the breakdown of 7.8, which We're going to go right now. We're going to start looking at the requirements. So 7811. The results shall be reviewed and authorized prior to release. That's a requirement. So I proposed a question there, by who? And I have a couple clauses there from personnel, which is section 6.2. So yes, it's required that the report shall be authorized prior to release. And you see those other requirements under personnel that correlates to answering the by who. 625 under personnel, the laboratory shall have procedures and retain records for authorization of personnel. Included on that authorization is not only the nuts and bolts of those folks that are authorized to perform the various testings and calibrations, but should also encompass those that are reviewing and authorizing the release of reports. 726, the laboratory shall authorize personnel to perform specific laboratory activities, including but not limited to the following. And under that list, C is directly related to 7811 as to by who, which, as you can see, is the authorization to report, review, and authorization of the results. So this next statement should be very familiar with those that are used to operating under the 2005 standard. The results shall be provided accurately, clearly, ambiguously, and objectively, usually in a report, such as a test report or calibration certificate, or report of sampling, and shall include all the information agreed with the customer as necessary for the interpretation of the results, and all information required by the method used. All issued reports shall be retained as technical records. It's a couple words there. I sort of picked out that word ambiguous. When that is specified here in this requirement, that's basically it's very clear. There are no two ways to interpret a result. It should be very direct. Objectivity, you do it with an open mind, considering the facts rather than any sort of personal feelings or bias. Couple notes here. A note, or if you're unaware, a note within the standard is just additional information. They aren't specific to as requirements that are presented for the laboratory to comply with. So for the note 1, basically, for the purpose of the standard 17025, test reports and calibration certificates are sometimes referred to as test certificates and calibration reports, respectively. And note 2, reports can be issued as hard copies or by electronic means, provided the requirements of this document is met. So with 2017, one thing with 2017 is more in tune with the electronic age. You don't see so much references to things such as list or indication of paper copies. However, even though it is more in tune with the electronic age and the language is tailored toward that, the standard does recognize paper copies. So if your organization is still utilizing hard copies, perhaps your customers like having a hard copy delivered to them, the standard still recognizes both electronic and hard copies. Okay, 7813. When agreed to with the customer, the results may be reported in a simplified way. Any information listed in 782 and through 787, which we'll get into, that is not reported to the customer shall be readily available. So what I have under there from the 2005 standard, if you're looking at the differences there, in 2005 it was specific to internal customers, and it states in a case that a written agreement is in place. 2017 no longer specifies internal customers or a written agreement. The lab should, however, and this don't come from the standard, I feel that the lab should, however, if you are doing simplified reporting. So what we're referring to here, we're going to go through the requirements within the reporting the results here, 782 to 787. For whatever reason, let's say, for example, your customer just wants that statement of compliance. They don't want the units, the actual numbers that was obtained. They just want a pass-fail indication. That actually can be done under the accreditation if that's what the customer wants. And customer has agreed to that. You can report the results in a simplified manner. Bear in mind, however, and we'll look at this a little further, that the records will still need to be maintained. Where need be, go back and duplicate the calibration or test and have all the significant contributors to uncertainty identified. So even if the customer does want simplified reporting, those records still need to be maintained, where if need be, that additional information that's not being reported could be produced. We do address this currently in PL3 in regards to measurement uncertainty, and under PJLA currently, and we have not revised our policies that since the 2017 standard. I anticipate we will be doing that very shortly as we get through the transition period, which will end in November of 2017, as far as the 2005 standard being withdrawn. We specify a written agreement would need to be in place in regards to measurement uncertainty. And this is specific for calibrations if they aren't to be, if the customer by chance does not want that reported, a written agreement as per PL3 would need to be in place. Okay, so 782 is common requirements. So we're going to look at all three types of organizations that 17025 encompasses, which are labs that do testing, calibration, and sampling that's going to be used for further testing or calibration. 7821, each report shall include at least the following information, and I bolded, unless the laboratory has a valid reason for not doing so, thereby minimizing any possibility of misunderstanding or misuse. And we're going to go down the list here. There are some differences here between the 2005-2017 standard, and there are many things that are still intact from 2005. So A, of course, is always was in 2005 is it has to have a title. You have to look at that report and know what it is. Is it a calibration report, calibration certificate, test report, report of sampling? Required to have the name and address of the lab, your organization is doing the testing or calibration. C, the location of the performance of the laboratory activity, including when performed at a customer facility or at sites away from the laboratory's facilities or in associated temporary or mobile facilities. So the location, where was the test performed? Was it at the fixed facility? I know I'm a calibration program manager, and I do a lot of assessments for calibration labs, and a lot seeing it more and more doing on-site calibrations, where they'll go on to the customer's location, set up their equipment, bring their standards in, and do the calibrations right there at the customer site. If that's being done, on that report should specify the location, which would be on site at the customer's location. Unique identification, that all its components are recognized as a portion of a complete report and a clear identification to the end of the report. So the unique identifier is going to be unique to that particular test, calibration, sampling report. Most of the time I'll see something such as a certificate number or a test number that's unique. C, the name, and I bold it because this is a new contact information of the customer. 2005 specified the name and address. So you can see a difference there between the two standards. We still need, of course, the name of the customer, but the contact information. By contact, that is the point of contact, the individual of your customers who is the contact for your organization. F, identification of the method used. What was the procedure? Could be an internal procedure, your laboratory internal SOP number. Could be a nationally recognized procedure such as ASTM, ASME, or USP type method. Whatever the procedure was utilized in doing the particular test or calibration needs to be specified on the report. A description, ambiguous identification, and when necessary, the condition of the item. In other words, if you look at the report, basically what was tested, what was the sample, what was the instrument that was being calibrated? It needed to be identified exactly what it was. Perhaps even make, model would be sufficient in this in complying with G here. The date of the receipt of the test or calibration items and the date of sampling, where this is critical to the validity of the application of the results. Okay, so this is not actually a requirement. It's only the requirement would be if the date of receipt would impact the final test or calibration results. So if shelf life, for example, if it's critical, if a sample may degrade over time. For example, if you're doing moisture content, you don't want to have a sample sitting out for several days in ambient condition because it would deteriorate. Therefore, in these cases, and be very important to record the date of receipt. It's not required. It is required, however, if it's critical to the validity of the test or calibration results. The actual date of the performance of the laboratory activity. So data test, data calibration. Now we have a new one here, and we actually have two dates that are needed. And I do realize it could be the same date, but if data test is the same, and you can see what J is, the data issue of the report. So that date of issue is the date that the report was reviewed, and whoever that individual who is authorized to review and release reports has completed that task, then that's the date that is actually issued to the customer. So we got two dates here: the date of the performance of the activity, the date of the date that the report was actually issued. So the J there is new, and if shelf life was critical, it's a possibility we could have three separate dates on there. Okay, if you're actually going out and doing the sampling, reference to the sampling plan and sampling method used by the lab or other bodies where these are relevant to the validity of the application of the results. A statement to the effect that the results relate only to the items tested, calibrated, or sampled. That's required. 2005 was stated where relevant. So for example, if you're calibrating a big coordinate measure machine, it's fairly obvious with a serial number. It would be fairly obvious that that was the only item that was captured on that report. However, if a dozen half-inch micrometers, it would be relevant to state which results are for which micrometer. You can see that word relevant has gone out. 2017 basically states that that statement needs to be put in place. the results with, where appropriate, the unit of measurements. So that is nothing new. So you see, actually I just did an assessment earlier this week, and I was reviewing a report, and I saw, I knew what that was probably recorded in, but there was no clear indication exactly what those units were. I saw a lot of numbers there. So make sure that it's clearly identified what units the units of measurements are in. Any additions to, deviations, or exclusions from the methods? Okay, we have to have the date of issue. We've recall in 6.2 we have individuals at the lab authorized to release reports. So under O, the identification of the person authorizing the report needs to be captured in the test, calibration, or sampling report. P, clear indications when results are from external providers. So external providers, that's subcontracting. So 6.6 is a section in 2005, which is now purchasing and subcontracting. 2017 does not make any reference to subcontracting or purchasing. Both are referred to as external providers. We have a note including a statement specifying that the report shall not be produced except in full without approval of the laboratory, can provide assurance that parts of the report are not taken out of contents. So that could be in instances where your reports are being issued and your customer is cutting and pasting various sections of your report. Can't be duplicated except in whole. Okay, 7.822, and again, we're still in common requirements. The laboratory shall be responsible for all the information provided in the report, except when information is provided by the customer. Data provided by a customer shall be clearly identified. In addition, a disclaimer shall be put on the report when the information is supplied by the customer and can affect the validity of results. Where the laboratory has not been responsible for the sampling stage, in other words, the sample has been provided by the customer, it shall state in the report that the results apply to the samples as received. So quite a bit of information there. Let's take that last sentence there with the folks in testing. You're testing samples. If for whatever reason your customer is bringing the samples to you, you're going to test what they brought you. You're not actually going out and trying to get a replica sample of a population. If that's the case, it needs to be indicated on the report, sample as received. So actually, I think just thinking about it would protect the lab, because you totally don't have control what your customer brought in. You don't know how that sample was taken, any statistical type of gathering that needed to be taken to get a replica sample, if that was actually done at all or not. Now that second part about deviations, probably the most likely scenario where that may be into play, and is spelled out earlier in the standard, especially under the environmental section of the standard, is for those folks that are going off-site and doing calibration. So perhaps you have predefined limits that the calibration, your procedure specifies it needs to be performed. Oh, let's say between 20 degrees C plus or minus 3 degrees C. Hence, if you go into a customer facility, may not be tightly as controlled as your lab. So you're actually going to be deviating from the procedure there. If that's the case, you need to have a conversation with the customer. You need to gain customer's approval, and then that deviation would need to be specified on the report exactly what the deviation was. Okay, so they were common elements there of all three. Now we're going to go into specifics for 783, which is specific to test reports. And I think those folks there, you're not going to see any change here. They're pretty much carried over from 2005. So again, 7.8, we're going to go through them here. 7.831, in addition to all the requirements that we just went through, test report shall, where necessary, for the interpretation of test results, include the following: information on the specific test conditions, such as environmental conditions, temperature, humidity, whatever, if it impacts your test results. Where relevant, a statement of conformity with requirements or specifications. So if you're stating a statement of conformity, we're going to expand on that a little bit here because there's a whole new section in the standard just dealing with that. Well, that's, I got pass fail written. That's an example of when you make a statement of conformity. Could be pass, fail, intolerance, out of tolerance, any wording like that is making a statement of conformity. Uncertainty, and I highlighted where applicable, which is different than calibration because it's where applicable with that. Where applicable for test reports, the measurement uncertainty presented in the same units as that of the measured and in the term relatives to the measured, such as percent, when is it applicable? It is relevant to the validity or application of the test results. A customer instruction so requires, or the measurement uncertainty affects conformity to a specification limit. You say pass, fail. This might be measurement uncertainty may actually need to be taken into account in those situations. Where appropriate, opinions, interpretations, additional information that may be required by specific methods, authorities, customers, or groups of customers. When the laboratory is responsible for the sampling activities, test reports shall meet the requirements listed in 7.8.5 where necessary. And that's a section on sampling we'll get to here in a little bit for the interpretation of the test results. So this is if your organization is actually going out and collecting the samples. Okay, so moving on to 7.8.4. This is for calibration. This is specific for calibration certificates, calibration laboratories. Right off the bat, A, the measurement uncertainty and the measurement results presented in the same units as that of the measured, and in terms relative to the measured, which percent again, same wording as in testing. So I have a reference to ISO Guide 99 there. So a key difference there. 2005, it stated the uncertainty of the measurement and/or a statement of compliance. That comes out of the 2005 standard. Now you see 7.8.4.1. We don't see that and/or anymore. It specifically states specifically states the uncertainty. So that is a specific requirement directly coming from the standard now for calibration laboratories. Any conditions under which the calibrations were made that have an influence on the measured results: temperature, humidity, barometric pressure. A statement identifying how the measurements are metrologically traceable. One of the annexes in the 2017 is Annex A, which is in regards to traceability. Also see PL2. One thing, when you reference traceability, a lot of people like in the US likes to see 2 NIST. That's inappropriate. If you're going to reference NIST and traceability, the verbiage is you're traceable to the SI, that's the SI unit actually, through NIST. So it cannot state being traceable to NIST, it's always through NIST. Still on calibration results, the results before and after any adjustment or repair if available. So if you is calibrating, let's say a pipette, for example, if it's out of tolerance, those instruments can be adjusted. So the before and after, as found, as left, they would need to be captured if they're different. Sometimes the as found could be the same as the as left if there was no adjustments. Sometimes an instrument may not be operating at all when it comes in, therefore there was no true as found value data there. Where relevant, a statement of conformity with requirements or specifications. Again, stating on a report, the customer wants a statement of compliance, pass, fail, intolerance, out of tolerance, good, bad. You know, any of those things would be making a statement of compliance. And where appropriate, opinions and interpretations. There's a reference here to sampling. However, sampling is primarily associated with testing labs, but you can see this requirement, if for whatever reason is carried over to the calibration labs, and I've yet to come across it, where the laboratory is responsible for sampling. Calibration certificates shall meet the same requirements, which we're going to go through here in section 785, necessary for the interpretation of the calibration results. 7843, this is something I would say a few times a year I get questions come in from this regarding this requirement. A calibration certificate or calibration label shall not contain any recommendation on the calibration interval except where this has been agreed to with the customer. So in other words, if you have an instrument calibrated and you want a recalibration done after a set period of time, you can call it a due date, a recall date. The actual requirement of having that on the report is not required. However, if it is on the report, it needs to be customer specified. So if the customer specifies they want a calibration due date of annual, 1 year, it can be put on the report, and it has to be customer specified. That is something the lab cannot dictate. If you're reviewing a report, just because it doesn't have a due date on it, it's not a non-conformance. It's not required to be on the report. However, if it is on the report, and as an assessor, if I'm reviewing a report and I see a due date, I'll specifically ask, where did that date come from? That's what our customer requested. That's the only reason it would be on there. It's got to be customer specified. Same with calibration labels, to sort of crosswalk over to both the report and the label. Sometimes you have the due dates on just such as this sample here of a calibration label. Okay, sampling. So if you're a test lab, you're going out and doing your own sampling, or perhaps you're a sampling organization going out collecting samples and bringing them into customers' laboratories to do the testing. So when the lab is responsible for the sampling activity, in addition to those all-encompassing requirements we went over in 782, report shall include the following where necessary for the interpretation of results. The date of sampling. B, what was sampled? Unique identification of the item or material sampling, including the name of the manufacturer, the model type or designation, and serial number as appropriate. The location of the sampling, including any diagrams, sketches, or photographs. A reference to the sampling plan or sampling method. Any applicable environmental conditions that were captured during the sampling. And this next one, F, we got that uncertainty word here again. So if the uncertainty if there's an uncertainty associated with the sample that's going to be a component of the total uncertainty for the test or calibration, that the uncertainty associated with the sampling needs to be on the sample report. So this is a new requirement. This is specific to sampling. So if that sample if that's a component of uncertainty utilized by the test lab, they need to know what that uncertainty is. It needs to be provided by the sampler. Okay, we spoke about statements of conformity. We have a section dedicated to it, 7A6. So when a statement of conformity to a specification or standard is provided, the laboratory shall document the decision rule employed, taking into account the level of risks, such as false accept and false reject, and statistical assumptions associated with the decision rule employed, and apply the decision rule. So a decision rule is a new term that's defined in the 2017 standards. So you see what the definition is there. A rule that describes how measurement uncertainty is accounted for when making statements conformity with a specification. So in other words, in 2005, it always was a requirement that stated when you make a statement of conformity, you have to take measurement uncertainty into account. That's nothing new. It's sort of beefed up now in 2017. Yes, you still have to take it into account, but you need to inform your customer as to how it was taken into account. And can't recall if I capture this on the next slide or not, but under section 7.1, review requests, tenders, and contracts, that's the first time the decision rule comes into play. And that's when you're coming to an agreement with the customer. So in other words, when your customer requests a statement of compliance, if they want to see a pass-fail to a specific specification on that report, then you need to convey to your customer. Well, first of all, you need to know what you want to, what specification your customer requires as far as that statement of conformity. Is it a specific tolerance or is it a customer specified tolerance? And then you have to convey up front, this is captured in section 7.1, what the decision rule will be. In other words, how you're going to take it into account. And for those folks, and I've done actually 2 webinars on this already because there's been a lot of questions about it. And on that website, I just did one a couple months ago on statement of conformity and decision rules. So it goes into a lot more detail there. If you want some added information on the decision rule, exactly what it is, I recommend you go to that recorded webinar. I got another document here that I can refer you to, and I got an example of a decision rule coming up. So for those folks that is just listening to this requirement for the first time, give you some guidance into what we're talking about here. 7862, the laboratory shall report on the statement of conformity such that the statement clearly identifies to which results the statement of conformity applies, which specification standards or part therein are met or not met. And again, the decision rule applied unless it's inherited in the requested specification or standard. So that C there, that could be utilized a lot with some of the testing results there. It could be specified within the procedure what the inherited decision rule was. And I have an example of that coming up here very shortly. So, excuse me, with you calibration labs, you have to report a decision rule. I've seen this just this past year doing assessments, and practically I would say I've done my last assessment to 2005 because everybody else, right now they better be transitioning to the 2017 standard. you're reporting the measurement uncertainty. When you're specifying your K equals to 95%, that's not the decision rule. That's stating how you calculated measurement uncertainty. Measurement uncertainty is how you take it into account. So the following is an example of a valid decision rule if you are guard banding and those folks are utilizing a 99% confidence interval. See an example there. Accounting for the uncertainty will be taken to mean that at a 95% confidence level, the measurement result plus and minus the expanded uncertainty K equals 2 shall be totally within the specification limit. So that's basically saying you're not going to state pass or fail unless every measurement is totally within that specification limit. If it happens to fall outside of that specification limit, you can't measurement. The uncertainty is actually going to affect that statement of compliance. So you have to, and I'm going to talk about a guidance document here that ILAC just released not too long ago. You wouldn't say pass, fail, intolerance, out of tolerance. ILAC coins the phrase conditional pass, conditional fail. PJLA currently in PL3, we actually have the term pass indeterminate, fail indeterminate. Under those conditions where measurement uncertainty may actually affect the statement of compliance. So there's the ILAC document that I was referring to. That's just it's a guidance document. Came out a couple months ago, and I was able to have that and utilize it in the PJLA webinar a couple months ago. So I did go through some information within the ILAC G8 document, which is the guidance on decision rules and statements of conformity. So testing, we mentioned something that may be inherited in the specific methods. So an example would be, for example, ASTME 18 for Rockwell hardness, where the testing and calibration decision rules take uncertainty into account effectively in the repeat testing and other limits as to the spread of the data, etc. And the rules are defined within the methods. All right, it is 787. That's the section if you're going to, for any reporting of opinions and interpretations. So 7871, when opinions and interpretations are expressed, the laboratory shall ensure that only personnel authorized for the expression of opinions and interpretations release the respective statements. The laboratory shall document the basis which the opinions and interpretations have been made. So this is new. When I say this is new from the 2005 standard. The opinions and interpretations expressed in report shall be based on the results obtained from tested or calibration and shall be clearly identified as such. This is now a requirement. It was a note in the 2005 standard. When opinions and interpretations are directly communicated by dialogue with the customer, a record of the dialogue shall be retained. Okay, section 7.8, that's amending report. Perhaps you release a report, you have to add to it, or perhaps you have to issue a new report. So when an issue report needs to be changed, amended, or reissued, any change of information shall be clearly identified, and where appropriate, the reason of the change included in the report. So the concept of where appropriate, the reason for the change, so specifying why you had to make a change in the report, that's a addition. That is a new requirement. That was not in the 2005 standard. Amendments to a report after issue shall be made only in the form of further documentation or data transfer, which includes a statement amended to reports or otherwise identified or equivalent form of wording. Such amendment shall meet all the requirements of this document being 17025. So if you released a report and then you want to change something and add to that report, or you'd have to do it within further documentation, and it needs to meet the requirements specified in 7882. I know most times in the past I would just issue a new report for whatever reason. So when it's necessary to issue a complete new report, this report shall be uniquely identified and shall contain reference to the original that it replaces. So in other words, recall we stated that each report had to have a unique identifier. For example, if your certificate number was your unique identifier for that report, and for whatever reason, you got a call from the customer, there was errors on the report. Say it was shortly after the first of the year, and you still wrote 2019 instead of 2020 on the report, and there was a transposed serial number on there. You decided that you would just reissue the report. So in the case of, and I gave the example, if you had the unique identifier as certificate number 1234, change it to certificate number. This is just an example. It's not a requirement. Just trying to illustrate how to achieve this. You could give it certificate number. The new unique identifier is certificate number 12348R, AR being amended report. Now you need to reference the report that it replaces. So somewhere it needs to specify so there's not two reports running around with the for the same sample or instrument. This report replaces certificate number 1234. Okay, folks, that's the end of today's presentation. So bear with me here. Okay, I'm looking. I don't see any questions right now. Sometimes it takes a minute to populate. So while things are fresh on your mind, we covered a whole lot of ground there under 7.8. If you have any questions, feel free, type it in the box. Normally I get quite a few questions, but it must be Friday. Don't have any right now, so I'll give it a minute, see if anything comes to mind. Attempt to answer it. If not, we'll see what we have going on next month, and we'll sign off. All right, I want to don't see any questions coming in. That's kind of unusual. Normally we spend a whole lot of time going over questions. Hopefully I explained everything so well that I didn't leave any gray areas, or I hope I didn't confuse anybody during that presentation. Anyway, let me go on to next month here, which I have a relatively short turnaround time here between webinars. Our next webinar is going to be set for March 19th. We're going to be looking at section 7.8, which is a section on complaints. Section 7.8 on complaints, there's a whole lot of differences there between 2005 2017. I believe it's 8 different clauses now. 2017 it was 1 section, 1 clause. So mark it on your calendar, March 19th. I appreciate everybody's logging in and listening to us. Again, this webinar is available, will be available on the PJLA website along with the slides. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to having you with us again next month, and I wish everybody a great weekend.